$21 trillion. What is your solution to this ever-growing problem?
Well, we just talked a little bit about that. No more of these big omnibus spending bills to fund the government. So, we have to get back to regular order. And the House of Representatives under Republicans in this last term has done a pretty good job. They passed all 12 appropriations bills and sent them to the Senate. Unfortunately, none of them passed the Senate and made it to the president's desk. So then at the end of the year, or when we try to fund the government for the fiscal year, there's this big group of spending and everybody threatens to shut the government down. And so I would say this, if the Senate can't get those appropriations, those spending bills through under regular order with 60 votes, they need to change their rules over there and get to a simple majority for spending, the same way that they did with the Supreme Court. If we do that, we pass the bills, we give them to the president for either signature or veto, you go through the regular process, the Democrats are going to be in a tough position to threaten all these things about how the world's going to come to an end and nobody's going to get their Social Security checks and everything else. So that's one. Second thing is, when I was out there, I have some experience reforming government. And every agency does need to be reformed, and again, starting with the Pentagon. But one of the things that I did, I worked for the Treasury agency that dispersed payments, Social Security payments, veterans payments, things like that. And I went to my boss, I said, we're making 1 trillion payments or whatever it is, and you know, half of them are by check and half of them are by electronics. What are we doing here? He says, well, you know, we could do them all electronic, but we'd have to get a bill passed. I said, let's do it. He said, Hagedorn, if you can do that, all the more power to you. Well, a few years later, we passed something called the EFT 99 Act. We closed 4 check writing centers. We eliminated 5% of my Treasury agency's workforce. We improved service to taxpayers and saved about $2 billion. I think that's what you're looking for out in Washington, is people who will use their positions of responsibility to downsize their own federal agencies and to make government more efficient. Fiscal discipline in the world, and I was the first person, I think, in America in the Republican Party who was hammering the Republican Party when George W. Bush was president. We never should have doubled the federal debt from $5 to $10 trillion. That was unconscionable. It's the reason we lost, by and large, we lost our majorities. But what Obama and the Democrats did after that was horrible, and unfortunately I don't see a lot of changes. Do we need changes in things like entitlements? Yes. Do we need to make some interesting ideas out there so we don't try to get branded as the worst people in the world for trying to change these programs and save money? Yes. One of the ideas I had long ago, and I would take it to Washington, is that you would offer up a person when they become 65 years old, whatever it is, to buy them out. You know, the guy that took Home Depot public a few years ago was CNBC. He was on TV, I think his name's Larry Langone, something like that. And he said, you know, the reason I collect Social Security, and he's worth $500 million or whatever it is, he says, I figure I'll spend it better than the government. But if he knew that he could cash out and then we could save whatever we would save for his years that he would live, maybe he'd give it back or put it in escrow and give it to his kids, whatever we do. We have to do things like that. Also, we should look at funding Social Security for people when they're born, not when they're of age, when the government squandered all the money. Start these accounts when people are 1 day old, because the money will grow if you invest it over the first 18 years instead of starting when you're 1. It's going to grow exponentially. You're going to have more there. People will be in a much better position to hold their own wealth and to have more of it when they retire.
Well, that was a bit of a rambling question. What was the question that you were seeking an answer to? Hold my time.
Certainly, I'm happy to repeat that. The national debt now exceeds $21 trillion. What is your solution to this ever-growing problem?
Thank you. Oh, that is an ever-growing problem in every sense of the word. I support a balanced budget amendment. Just like we have in the state of Minnesota, we have to balance our budget. Our Constitution requires that. Now, sometimes those are hard decisions, let me tell you. And you're going to see how hard those decisions are in the next few weeks. Although this is not a budget year. I keep reminding everyone who wants to spend more money, this is not a budget year. But every 2 years we have a budget year, and it's a big fight about how much money are we going to spend? How are we going to spend it? Is this the rightful role of government? And so I think Washington could learn a lot from Minnesota. I do support a balanced budget amendment. That would help immensely. We cannot continue to crank out money, so to speak, or encourage debt. Our grandchildren, my grandchild hasn't even been born yet. But you know what? He or she has got a world of debt on them from previous generations of overspending. Now, some people can talk about that, and you've heard a lot of talk tonight, and during the campaign, you're going to hear a lot of talk. And people can say anything. But you know what? I have a voting record. I have an extensive voting record of standing up for the taxpayer, delivering $600 million of tax cuts, standing against $2 billion of tax increases, supporting increased estate tax exemption, supporting Section 179 full conformity. You want to talk about helping your farmers and your small businesses? That's one way to do it. Let them expense that equipment out. Mr. Quist would understand that for sure. Many of you would here. Those are the type of things that I have not only talked about, but supported, advanced, and accomplished in the Minnesota Senate. Now, you never get all the things you want at the same time. Nice to talk about that, but it doesn't always happen that way. So we got some greater Section 179 expensing, and we got some greater estate tax conformity. I believe that first, having a balanced budget amendment. Secondly, we need to elect people to Washington, D.C. who are not from Washington, D.C. We don't need to import people from Washington, D.C. to come in here into the 1st Congressional District and try to represent us. We need people who have actually lived here in the 1st Congressional District, people who have raised a family here, had to run a business here, started a small business here, been involved in our civic and our nonprofits and our churches throughout the 1st District. So we need to send people to Washington, D.C. who are not only one of us, people who represent our values, but people who are prepared. People who know what it's like to lead. People who know what it's like to balance a budget. And quite frankly, I'd like to see more small business owners and any business owners in any elected government. People like me who had to sign the front of a check, not just the back of a check. Those type of people are the folks that we need in Washington, D.C., and then we need a balanced budget amendment to hold them accountable. Not only is it the right thing to do, it's the moral thing to do, and our future depends on it. Your grandchildren's future depends on it, and my unborn grandchild's future depends on it.
Our fifth and final question, we begin with you, Senator Nelson. How are you and your campaign best positioned to win in November?
Oh, that is such a great question, because that's just what I wanted to talk about. We are best positioned to win in November for a lot of reasons. One, we have the best candidate. I'm the only candidate that has a proven track record of standing up for our Second Amendment rights, voting for concealed carry, voting for the Castle Doctrine, earning an A rating from the NRA. I'm the only candidate in this race who has a proven record of standing up for pro-life. In fact, the nation's premier pro-life group, the Susan B. Anthony Group, has already endorsed this race. They often don't get involved until after the primary, but they know, as so many Minnesotans know, as so many Americans know, the stakes are too high, folks. The stakes are too high for us not to have our strongest candidate on the ballot. In fact, the very majority of the U.S. House of Representatives could be at risk, and we know what that first vote would be. In fact, they've already teed it up. They're going to impeach the president. That would be their first vote. Folks, we cannot afford to have a perennial loser come out of the primary and try and represent us on the November ballot. This district was won by President Trump by 15 points. That is not a red wave, that is a red tidal wave. Now over in where the district where I'm from, Olmsted County, that was the only district in the state, or the only district in the 1st Congressional District, the only county that didn't vote for President Trump. It voted for Hillary Clinton. But yet, over there, in that harder part of the 1st District, not only did I win, I beat the Democrat by 12 points, and I outperformed our president by 10 points. So I know that a lot of you have been friends here with Mr. Hagedorn. Jim has run hard races. He ran in 2010. He ran in 2012. Excuse me, Mr. Quist ran in 2012. He ran in 2014, and he ran in 2016. And it'd be quite easy for me to stay in the Minnesota Senate, where I have a 4-year term. I'm a senior member. I have a gavel. But I'll tell you what, I can't do that. I cannot do that because the stakes are too high. I believe in our country. I know that we are at great risk if we do not win this congressional seat. I have outraised my opponent 2-1 in my first quarter of that I was in the race. My second quarter report just came out. It was a March report. And again, we have more money on hand for the primary election than Mr. Hagedorn does. And he has been running for 16 months. I have been running for 7. We have the money, we have the candidate, we have the endorsements behind us that are going to carry us across the line. I ask for your support because the stakes are too high not to have our strongest candidate in November.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for everybody for attending, and I'm looking forward to the governor's debate after this. Carol, thank you for moderating. You know, we were, like I said, we were here on election night 2016. It was a tough loss, 49.6% of the vote. If 61 votes in each of the 21 counties flip from Tim to Jim, we win. That's how close it was. And I got to tell you, I woke up the next day a happy person. I wanted to beat Tim Walz. We all did. We worked very hard. Because of you, we got close. We had great staff and all our volunteers. We're close. But I woke up a happy person for a fairly simple reason. Because our race for Congress, my race, my election, it wasn't the most important one on the ballot. The most important one on the ballot was for President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. And had we lost that election, we would have lost the country. The Supreme Court hung in the balance. Scalia's appointment alone would have made a difference. Could have turned us into California if it went the wrong way. We would have been back to the Obama policies, and who knows where we would have ended up. When they asked me about that before the election, do you support Donald Trump for president? I was quoted in the paper of record over in Rochester, and I said, absolutely, because if he loses, we lose the country. And I encouraged everyone to vote for him. Because his election was more important, the country was more important than me, you are more important than me. My opponent didn't do the same thing. She said she couldn't even vote for him, or at least she couldn't commit to it. I don't think that's the type of leadership we need in Washington, D.C. I think it's time we don't send people out there anymore, like these John McCain types, who tell us they're Republicans and all, and then when the crunch time comes down, they're just not there for us. Folks, when it was on the line, when it could have been the easiest thing for me to do because everybody thought it would have been wrong to hang with Trump. There's no way. I'll fight for you every day. This is about us. This is about our victory. This is the time, it's the third time in 100 years we've had the House, the Senate, and the White House in Washington, the Republican Party. This is the third time in our lifetime, so we had a chance to make real conservative change. We did it under Reagan, we did it under Gingrich, and now we have to do it under Trump. If we make these changes in these next 2 years and have people like me who can hit the ground running and be part of that caucus on day one and do everything we can for our conservative movement, we can give this country another 20 or 30 years of life, just like Reagan and the Republicans did. This is the most important and consequential election of our lifetimes in this district. Let's get it done. I ask for your support and your endorsement. Thank you.